Hello everyone and welcome to the weird, scary and horrible parts of humanity. Firstly, apologies for the croakiness in my voice as I've got the flu. Being a pilot in the Soviet Union for the country's national flag carrier Aeroflot, at least for the Soviet Union, was a pretty good and highly sought after gig. It gave you a relatively high salary, a prestigious social class and social standing, which would ultimately help you in acquiring assets, for example an apartment. Perhaps most significantly, it gave you the opportunity to travel, and depending on the aircraft and from where you operated, you could fly internationally, which at the time was banned for most Soviet citizens. In essence, giving a human being control of an aircraft gave them a weapon that they could use to do what was considered by the Soviet Union to be the unthinkable: defect. However, combined with their cushy lifestyle, there were two things that prevented a lot defecting. One was their family being back in the USSR, and second was that there was an air marshal aboard most flights, and indeed aircraft captains as well as navigators were armed. This came to pass following the 1970 hijacking of Aeroflot Flight 244. This saw the hijacking of an Antonov AN-24 on the 15th of October 1970 by father and son Pranas Brazinskaz and Algirdas Brazinskaz, with flight attendant Nadezhda Kurchenko killed in the process as the aircraft made it to Trabzon, Turkey, in a massive embarrassment for the Soviet government. By the way, we did an earlier video on that hijacking, so please don't forget to check that video out. Hence, despite Aeroflot, the national carrier of the Soviet Union and today the national flag carrier of Mother Russia, being the largest airline in the world during the Cold War and operating thousands of aircraft, in the history of the Soviet Union, only one Aeroflot pilot would try to defect, and that was co-pilot Shamil Alimuradov. The Antonov AN-24 is a 44-seat turboprop aircraft built by the Soviet Union from 1959 until 1979, with 1,367 built. It became one of the backbones of Aeroflot's regional transport during the Soviet Union. On the 19th of December 1985, the regional Yakutsk United Air Group division of Aeroflot flew an Antonov AN-24 registration CCC P42845, which flew from Yakutsk in Sakha in modern-day Russia to Irkutsk, the capital of Irkutsk Oblast, which is now the 25th largest city in Russia. The flight number was Aeroflot Flight 101/435. A direct flight between these two cities would have been about 4 hours and 32 minutes, a distance of 1,860 kilometers. However, Aeroflot Flight 101/435 would stop in Takhtamyka and Chita on her way to Irkutsk. The aircraft was built at the Kiev Aviation Plant in modern-day Ukraine, with the serial number 1730747 and serial number 074/07 on the 24th of December 1971. It was transferred to the Ministry of Civil Aviation of the Soviet Union and began flying for the Yakut Civil Aviation Administration of Aeroflot on the 25th of January 1972. There were 5 crew members aboard this flight. One was 36-year-old second-class pilot Vyacheslav Sergeyevich Abrayaman. Abrayaman was a graduate of the Sasovo Flight School, a secondary civil aviation school of the Soviet Union, based in Sasovo in modern-day Russia, which remains open to this day. He gained experience in agricultural aviation, but gained qualification to pilot the AN-2, a Soviet light multi-purpose built aircraft operating for the Soviet Air Force, as well as the AN-24. The co-pilot was 33-year-old Shamil Alimuradov. He had flown as a co-pilot of the AN-24 for a combined 3 years. Having trained at the Leningrad Academy of Civil Aviation in Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, he graduated at the end of 1979 when he was transferred to Yakutsk as part of the 271st Flight Detachment. He was married and had a daughter. Both pilots had worked together for 2 months. In addition, there was a navigator with the surname of Nikorev, a flight mechanic with the surname of Ospiov, and I do apologise as I couldn't find both of their first names, and one flight attendant, whose name I couldn't find, aboard the AN-24. Flight 101/435 was above capacity with 46 passengers. They departed a freezing Yakutsk where it was minus 42 degrees. The first leg, Yakutsk to Neriungi, went off without a hitch, except for a bizarre joke from Alimuradov, who joked, "We'll have lunch in Shanghai," which everybody just took as one of his weird jokes. While on the tarmac in Neriungi with Alimuradov, the only one in the cockpit, he looked for Zikrev and Abraham's guns, but were unable to find them, with both armed to prevent a hijacking. They then departed from Neriungi for the second leg to Chita. The navigator left the cockpit to go to the toilet. Alimuradov then went into the cabin and then returned to the cockpit and told the flight mechanic that the flight attendant needed help from them, with the flight mechanic proceeding to leave the cockpit. This only left Alimuradov and Abramyan in the cockpit, with Abramyan dozing off. However, Alimuradov had brought something on board with him, a homemade knife. He locked the cockpit door internally, which meant that it couldn't be opened from the cabin, and then put a knife to Abramyan's throat, telling him to fly south to China. Abramyan would state, "Are you crazy?" Alimuradov would reply, "Let's fly, I have nothing to lose, don't twitch." Abramyan stated, "Shamil, you have a daughter, think about her, about your mother, brother, motherland, it's not safe, where are we flying? For what? It is pointless." But Alimuradov was determined. Abramyan would tell Meduza in 2016 that with his colleague being a hijacker, he really didn't know what to do, stating, "When a terrorist is a passenger in the cabin, that's one thing, but when he's a crew member sitting in the cockpit with you, it's completely different. You are not psychologically ready for this. This is a betrayal to the highest degree." The problem was that he, as a pilot, could foresee my every step, my every moment. I tried to persuade him to give up his criminal actions. I said that I would take all the blame on myself. I would say that we had lost our way, but Alimuradov was adamant. Now, this was a pretty stupid plan in escaping the Soviet Union, because despite relatively poor Soviet-Sino relations, they were still somewhat allies at the time. But flying a regional aircraft from Yakutsk, China represented one of the only opportunities for Alimuradov to escape the Soviet Union. But why was China his only opportunity? Well, Alimuradov was based in Yakutsk, which was in the east of the Soviet Union, but he never flew on board the AN-24 to the far west of the Soviet Union, with the range of the aircraft being only 550 kilometers, with the maximum payload, or 2,400 kilometers, with its maximum fuel. Indeed, if it was a full flight, there wasn't even enough range to make it from Vladivostok to Sapporo in Japan, which was 771 kilometers. So in essence, Alimuradov could only fly to mainland China. However, this represented arrest and imprisonment, with China one of the Soviet Union's closest allies and herself a communist country since the 1st of October 1949. However, by the mid-1980s, relationships were becoming a bit frosty between the two nations, and Alimuradov would state, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend," and hence he believed that he would be safe and protected in China. Using a panic button, Abramyan notified the dispatcher about the hijacking, after which he tried to land at a military airfield in the Soviet Union. However, Alimuradov recognized this and forced him to stick to the flight path to mainland China. The navigator and mechanic tried to get into the cockpit, but were unable to unlock the door, having tried with a screwdriver to unlock it. But having heard them, Alimuradov threatened to kill Abramyan. When approaching the Soviet-Chinese border, Abramyan contacted air traffic control, reporting the situation, and received information on setting the radio compass to the nearest Chinese airport, Quiquia, putting the distress signals on. Quiquia Airport remains operational to this day. However, bar seasonal and charter flights to Seoul and Incheon in South Korea, it only serves domestic flights operated by Chinese carriers. Once they made it into China, ironically, Abramyan became scared and turned pale white, thinking that the plane would be shot down by the Chinese military as fuel was running out and they had no route maps and nobody knew the plane was in China. In essence, they were invading. After 20 minutes, the radio compass needle began to rotate chaotically and then stopped working and began to point in the wrong direction. According to Aubameyang, Chinese authorities deliberately tried to throw the plane off course in their navigation given to Quick-We-Are. They were flown in a circle along a mountainous area so that they would run out of fuel and ultimately crash. This was despite Chinese border troops not scrambling flights to intercept the aircraft. Aubameyang would state in a 2016 interview that he believed that the Soviet government also wanted the plane to crash. In essence, all of these passengers and crew could die under the Soviet government and nobody would be any wiser. Running out of fuel and unable to make it to Quick-We-Are, they landed at 2:30 p.m. local time in rice fields near Gannan in Heilongjiang province. Nobody was injured and the plane only received minor damage. Aubameyang's ability to land the plane alone was undoubtedly helped by his previous experience in agricultural flying. By now they were 500 kilometers from the border with the USSR. Residents came running out to see the Aeroflot plane. Landing, Aubameyang turned the engine off with Alimuradov hugging him and stating, "Glory, well done, this is your flight, you will be a hero." Incensed, Aubameyang shouted, "Fuck you! Don't forget, you are a hostage." Alimuradov retorted, stating, "Don't be offended, I didn't mean any harm to you, only to them." He was referring to the Soviet state. A few minutes later, passengers left the aircraft and went out into the street. As far as we know, this would have most likely been their first time overseas out of the Soviet Union. Many were unaware that the plane had even been hijacked and that they had crossed into China. Chinese soldiers approached the plane, with Alimuradov leaving the plane, knife still in hand, raising his hands and stating, "I need political asylum." Approaching the plane, the soldiers asked him, "For what purpose did you come to China? What are your requirements?" Alimuradov stated, "I have no demands. I'm alone. However, I have a request. Allow the plane to launch. The passengers are cold. They need to be warmed up. Second, I am asking for political asylum." The military responded, "We guarantee you political asylum, but you must cooperate with us." Alimuradov was taken to Harbin, the largest city in the region and the capital of Heilongjiang. Today it has a population of 31.85 million. There he was interrogated. Passengers and the remaining crew remained on board the flight, but the crew were forbidden from turning the engines on. As a result, passengers were freezing, with the temperature dropping to -25, and they were given warm clothes and food. Then they were taken to a hotel in Hilar. A representative of the Soviet Union arrived, and 29 hours after they arrived in China, the passengers and remaining crew were taken to Quick-We-Are, and then on the 21st of December to Harbin. While in Quick-We-Are, they were given questionnaires and forced to write their name, and the purpose of their visit was a tourist trip. Makes sense when your aircraft is hijacked. There they ate at a local restaurant and got Chinese multicoloured thermoses as a gift. From Harbin, they took a Tu-134, a Soviet aircraft serving short to medium haul routes built from 1956 to 1989. They were flown back to the USSR to their original final destination of Chita. Well, that was all of the crew except for Alimuradov, who remained in Harbin. But what the hell motivated him in hijacking the aircraft and flying to China? Well, he was offended that he was still a co-pilot and never promoted to captain, having written numerous times to higher authorities complaining that this was unfair. He began to believe that everyone was against him and even wrote to the United Nations complaining about his lack of career advancement. However, he had been sent to a neurologist 5 times, including a psychiatric hospital, and briefly suspended for 2 years from flying. This was because of his mental health difficulties, his continual demand of being promoted, and nobody really wanted to fly with him. However, the neurologist and psychiatric hospital found no abnormalities within him. During the time that he was unable to fly, he worked at a motor depot. However, Alimuradov used his connections to get his job as a co-pilot with Aeroflot back. However, this wasn't uncommon within the Soviet Union, where it was about who you knew instead of what you knew. He wrote to the then first deputy premier of the Soviet Union, who he was close to, Heydar Aliyev, Aliyev would go on to become the third president of Azerbaijan, acting in the role from the 24th of June 1993 until the 10th of October 1993, and officially taking up the role from the 10th of October 1993 until the 31st of October 2003. This led him to return to flying on the 11th of March 1985, however once again to his dissatisfaction as a co-pilot. His lack of career advancement led him to defect to China, as he blamed the Soviet state for his lack of promotion, and he said that if he was unsuccessful in the hijacking attempt, he would just crash the plane into the ground. In essence, he felt like he had nothing to live for. His trial didn't begin until the 4th of March 1986 in Harbin, which only lasted a day. During the trial, he was represented by a local Chinese lawyer. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison, but was released on parole on the 19th of March 1988. While in jail in China, his wife died in a car accident. Remaining in Harbin, he taught Russian at the Harbin Medical Institute, a pediatrical school, as well as the Institute of Foreign Languages in Jiamusi on the border with the Soviet Union. Ironically, he looks back on his life in China fondly. He married a Chinese woman, they went for walks, and he attended concerts. A singer even came up to Harbin from Beijing and sang the Azerbaijani folk song Ashin Malalan for their guest from the Soviet Union. However, this wasn't to last too long, and the Soviets petitioned their Chinese counterparts for his extradition. As a result, he was extradited in 1989 to the Soviet Union and charged with the hijacking of Flight 101/435. He was charged in Yakutsk. However, he was told that he would only do 1 year in jail in the Soviet Union. However, upon his return, he was sentenced to 5 years in jail. He was pretty pissed off about this and would tell Meduza, "Well, I served my time. I don't see anything wrong with it. When I returned to the Soviet Union, they assured me that I would serve a year and be released, and then the USSR collapsed, and I served a full 5 years. Ironically, once released in 1995, he entered a different country, Russia, with the country he was so desperate to escape, the Soviet Union, having collapsed in 1991. As soon as he was released, he married another woman and moved to Russia's capital, Moscow. He would never fly again, which really isn't a big surprise, and became an entrepreneur. In 2000, he went back to China and met with his old friends in Harbin. He was asked if he wanted to see his ex-wife, and he refused, saying that she had probably moved on, most likely had remarried, and probably had a family of her own. He would have more children and gain custody of his daughter from his first marriage. He would also become the member of the United Russia Party, a conservative political party and the largest political party in the state Duma, with Vladimir Putin its de facto leader. And honestly, if you had to pick any political party that he could be a member of, it just had to be that one, didn't it? In a 2016 interview, he stated that he does not regret the hijacking and does not consider himself guilty. All of the remaining crew, except for the flight attendant, were suspended from flying upon their return to the Soviet Union. 1 year after returning to the Soviet Union, Osipov started flying again. Zikoev ultimately left aviation. Upon his return to Yakutsk, Abrahamyan was immediately dismissed and interrogated by the KGB for 6 months. He suffered a lot from the hijacking, unable to fly, pursue his career, and was taken off the waiting list for housing. As a result, over the next 3 years he did odd jobs as a loader, before going back into aviation and working as a flight attendant. But he was able to return to flying 3 years later in 1988. Initially working as a co-pilot, he then became a captain after 6 months. He retired from flying in 1998 as a first-class pilot. He then went into airline management, becoming a deputy general representative of Yakutia Airlines. He currently resides in Moscow. Based in Yakutsk, Yakutia Airlines flies 13 planes in the far east of Russia, serving 32 destinations across 2 countries. Abrahamyan would state in a 2016 interview, "I forgave Alimuradov for everything a long time ago, but I don't want to see him, and I don't want to talk to him either. Of course my career could have turned out differently. I think not everyone would be able to cope with such psychological trauma and overcome all these difficulties." As for the AN-24 aircraft, she was left in China before being transported to Chita in January 1986. She operated in the Yakut State Civil Aviation Administration and then in 1993 joined, ironically, Yakutavtrans Airlines, which would merge with Yakutavia and become Yakutia Airlines in 2002. Ironic, because it's now where Abriamayan now works. The tail number for the aircraft was changed to RA47845. In 2000, the aircraft was retired and put into storage at Yakutsk Airport, and in 2009 was scrapped for metal. Today, Aeroflot only flies to Krasnoyarsk and Moscow Shramatov from Yakutsk. Aeroflot no longer serves Chita, while Takatamjaga Airport is closed. Today, only 93 AN-24s are in service, operating with smaller Russian airlines, including UT Air Cargo, Angara Airlines, IR Ario, Yakutia Airlines, as well as Air Koryo, as well as Southern Sky, a Kazakh airline which is a regional subsidiary of SCAT. Thank you for watching. Please do yourself a favour and hit that subscribe button and the bell icon to be informed of when new videos come out. Also, why not hit that like button and leave a nice comment? It helps more than you know, and your support is truly appreciated. Until next time, stay awesome, stay classy, be kind to everyone you meet, have an amazing day, and remember the truth is always more interesting than fiction.